Dr. Mark here. This is a video log of our 2020 Boundary Waters canoe trip with a little Northwoods natural history thrown in. Lake 1 is one of the busiest entry points in the Boundary Waters. This sign is at the spot where everyone drops and picks up their gear. It is a good introduction to what people are about to see. I grew up with Smokey the Bear telling us that wildfire is something to be avoided, but fire is a necessary part of many ecosystems. Regular fires keep prairies treeless and release nutrients to keep the soil fertile. Forest fires remove dead wood from the forest floor and open the canopy so new trees can grow. Some species, like aspen and jack pine, are fire dependent. Their reproductive cycles require periodic fires. Since the Yellowstone fire in the 1970s, fire management for the Forest Service has changed from stop all forest fires to let it burn until it endangers homes or property. In late August 2011, a lightning strike started a small fire just south of Lake 1. Over the next 10 days, it tripled in size, but was still contained to a relatively small area. The next 2 days, however, due to windy conditions, it grew into the biggest fire in the Northwoods since the fires of 1871. It burned a total of 144 square miles. Our trip was to take us along the northern edge of the burn zone, the red line near the top of the map. Through the numbered lakes to Lake Insula, there are several short portages of 40 rods or less, and one of 95 rods into Lake Insula, for a total of about 17 miles of paddling and portaging. This is a solid day's travel, or 2 short days, for geezers like us. It was not to happen as we planned. The day we put in happened to be the day the remnants of a tropical storm moved into northern Minnesota. Starting out our trip to the Boundary Waters on a rather gray day. This is the Lake 1 entry point, and we're going off to the left right up there. The first part of the trip went smoothly through the protected narrows that are actually part of the Cowichouee River. But as soon as we got to the larger part of the lake, we were hit with a very strong northwest wind that blew us into a part of the lake we didn't want to be. After battling this for a couple hours, we picked our way along the south shore to the portage. We were being tossed about so much I didn't have time to video, so this clip is actually from another trip along the Oyster River near Ram's Head Lake. I won't be seeing too many waterfalls on this trip, so I guess I'd better take the advantage and take a picture of this one as long as I still have it. On finally getting to Lake 2, I almost set my pack down on a woodchuck. We looked at each other, both of us kind of surprised. He looked a little bit confused, but just sat there. So I went for my camera and was going to take a video, but he was a little bit too fast and ducked behind the weeds here. Apparently he thought that if he couldn't see me, I couldn't see him, and I knew it wasn't going to last long, so I just took a photograph. Again on Lake 2, the wind blew us to the far southwest corner of the lake, and after over an hour of fighting the wind, we got to an unoccupied campsite high on a hill with a western exposure. We were fed up and took it. This area, much of it was
burned over in the Pagami Lake fire about a dozen years ago, and it really looks desolate, but all of the islands were saved, and some other spots as well on the mainlands. But where we are, I'll take you up to my tent here. Hello. This area here was burned over for the most part. You can see the dead trees sticking up and the young trees starting. It was so windy that evening, we didn't dare light a campfire, and the stove needed to be shielded, so we cooked a simple supper in the tent, read our books, and went to bed. Yesterday was an extremely windy day, a little bit of rain here and there. Today is only a very windy day, but it's sunny. Here's a look at the place where we're staying. You can see the trees being tossed by the wind, but it looks a lot nicer this morning than it did yesterday. My brother and I decided to take a larger tent this year. It's just a lot more space, and even though it was really windy last night and the tent looked like it was going to buckle at times, it held up. A little bit more of a tour. We've got some viburnums blooming. And blueberries, lots of little green blueberries here. And if you look just under there, you see flowers of wild sarsaparilla. This is a beautiful view from up here. There's the fire grate and camp furniture. And off to the side there is our bear rope. The canoe is tucked down around back. But this is another area where you can really see the effects of a forest fire. The Pagami Creek fire was a very large one here, and it went through about 12-13 years ago. You can see all those dead trees along the shoreline. We happen to be on a little peninsula that, at least for the end of this peninsula, was saved, as well as a couple of these islands around. Didn't get it. It seemed to me, as I looked around, that it was a very intense low fire, rather than a fire that went through the tops of the trees so much. A lot of the bottoms of the trees got burned. But it is all greening up. And in another 20 years, you probably won't be able to see that there was any fire. Finally, the wind died down in the evening, and we had a chance to make a campfire. The sunset that evening reminded us both of a forest fire in the distance.
This morning, we broke camp and decided to go back to Lake One for the remainder of our stay. The trip itself was uneventful, but there are two short portages separated by a little pond barely 30 yards across. It's almost not worth the effort taking things in and out of the canoe. It reminded me of the Karate Kid. Packs on, packs off. Packs on, packs off. We got a late start from Lake 2, so by the time we got to Lake 1, we had to go to the very west end to find a camp. On the way, we saw this gigantic beaver on shore. Then we chased the geese out of the site and set up camp. I often wake with the sun when I camp, but David tends to sleep in a bit, so I usually stay in my sleeping bag, read a book, and listen to the birds. This morning, on the back end of the tent, there was a shadow from a jack pine that reminded me of a Chinese painting.
Our first 2 days on Lake 2 were, well, windy. We were winded in. We really couldn't move very much. So we decided for the last part of our journey to go back to Lake 1. And we started out probably a little late, 1:30. And by the time we got to Lake 1, we had to go way to the far end of Lake 1 to find a place to camp. So this is our second camp. I'll just give you a tour of what it looks like out here. This is our lake shore, and walking up to camp, there's our tarp and our bear bag hanging up there, and the fire pit, our tent back there. So it's a cozy little camp. Not too bad. There are some interesting botanical features here too, we've found. One of them is this plant right here. Notice that it has white leaves. This happens to be a red osier dogwood, but I believe, particularly since some of the leaves are half white, half green, like this, that this is probably being attacked by a virus, which destroys the enzyme that makes the chlorophyll. Right next to it is something kind of interesting too. These flowering plants right here with these strangely maple-shaped leaves and terminal racemes here of small flowers are what are called striped maple or moosewood. They are a maple, same genus as the sugar maple, but they have very, very different flowers. And the reason that they are called striped maple is because on the second and third year branches, hopefully you can see this, on the second and third year branches, there are tiny green stripes in the brownish or reddish young bark. Looking around for other things to show you here. Oh, this is an amelanchier. It doesn't have any berries right now, but this is amelanchier serviceberry. Shadbush is another name for it. They're fairly common here, and they do have small green berries right now, and in 2 to 3 weeks they will have bright red, semi-edible berries with large seeds. Looking around, well, these ferns down here you find everywhere. Those are very common ferns. And down the path towards the lake, we have some wild roses. Mostly in bud, but there are a few that are just beginning to bloom. That's a gorgeous little one right there. And a little bit farther down the path, they aren't open yet because the sun isn't out. Something that I found just in the last couple of days here is that these things, they're hawkweeds. They have a daisy-like flower, but they're on a very long, in fact some of these stems here are almost 2 feet long. They have a group of flowers, dandelion-like flowers at the top of the stem, and they close up at night and then open the next morning. Right down here, I was talking about serviceberry. These are serviceberries with the berries on them. Again, they'll be ready in probably 3 weeks or so. This particular site that we have has lots of balsam fir. Come right up here and take a look at one of the branches. Balsam fir has flat needles like that usually go off to the side, so it's flat, but it also has bark like this that has a lot of pitch in it. Let me get my knife out. I'll show you. Each one of these little blisters here contains quite a bit of pitch. And if you put ropes around this tree, like we have, you're going to break some of them. And that's why we don't like the tree, because it gums up our ropes. If you have ever used a microscope slide, the gum from this balsam fir, called Canada balsam, is what is used to put the specimen in and put the cover slip on. It's a natural glue. When it dries, it preserves the specimen inside there. So you've probably, this is a good example right here of what happens. See all these drips here as those blisters are broken. But if you've ever used a microscope slide, you've seen Canada balsam. Now here's an example of that moosewood out in bright sun. This isn't a tall tree. Here's a moosewood tree right behind me here that is about 15 feet high, and that is about as big as it ever gets. It is definitely an understory tree. These very large leaves down here that are lining the path, kind of long heart-shaped leaves, belong to the large-leaved aster, which will be blooming later this summer. The flowers aren't really anything to write home about. Probably only about 20-30 very narrow ray flowers. One more. That is a false Solomon seal. True Solomon seals will have 2 to 3 bell-like flowers hanging from the axil of each leaf, and false Solomon seal have all of their flowers in a terminal raceme at the end, 20 to 30 flowers at the end. So that's a false Solomon seal. Both true and false Solomon seals have a large root that can be used and eaten like a potato. As you can see here, even in the woods, we have dandelions, but just underneath everything here is one other plant. That is the Canada Mayflower that's blooming. Usually 2, maybe 3 leaves like this, with about 20 little flowers up on top. Now, some of you will probably say that that bear bag is hung way too low, and I would agree, but there are so few trees that have branches that are strong enough to throw something over, and the trees that are here have so many low branches that we haven't been able to hang things properly. So this is about as good as we could do, other than possibly grounding the food bag off on one of those rocks over there, which we've done before too.
The next day we went exploring. We had left some of our food in the car, so we went back to the entry point via Confusion Lake and the Cowish River. It was an interesting little trip with a bit of a challenge because one of the portage landings was at the base of a waterfall. The last day was uneventful. We broke camp, paddled to the entry point, loaded the car, and drove back to Ely. These videos take a while to edit. Please leave your comments below, and if you like what I do, please subscribe.